My daughter's fiancé laughed throughout the entire Christmas dinner, telling everyone how he had finally pulled her away from her controlling father. While he was pouring the wine, my daughter slipped me a note under the pie dish. 3 words: "Dad, save me." Then I understood everything. That Tuesday, my revenge began. He screamed and I laughed. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. The first time Derek Collins walked into my house, he brought a $90 bottle of Blanton's bourbon. Not the regular stuff, the single barrel. The kind you bring when you want a man to notice you did your homework. My name is Harold Patterson. I'm 64. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. And for 28 years, I owned a restaurant called the Southern Lantern on East Boulevard. When you spend nearly 3 decades watching people walk through your door, first dates, anniversaries, business deals gone wrong, couples pretending they aren't falling apart over the appetizer course, you develop a sense for performance. You learn to tell the difference between a person who's enjoying the meal and a person who's enjoying the audience. Derek Collins was enjoying the audience. My daughter Lauren brought him to my birthday dinner 2 years ago. She was 29 then, working as a graphic designer at a solid agency downtown, calling me almost every day just to talk. That was our thing. She'd phone on her lunch break, I'd be on the back porch with my coffee, and we'd talk about nothing. Her latest project, which vinyl I'd picked up at the flea market that weekend, whether the trout were biting on the catawba. Small things, the kind that hold a life together without you noticing until they're gone. Derek shook my hand like he was closing a real estate deal, which, as I later learned, was exactly how he approached everything. Firm grip, direct eye contact, a smile that arrived half a second too fast. He asked about the restaurant. He asked about fly fishing. He laughed at my jokes a beat before the punchline landed. And when Lauren started telling a story about a client at work, he put his hand on her knee and said, "Babe, let your dad open his present first." She stopped mid-sentence, smiled, went quiet. I noticed, but I told myself it was nothing. Over the next few months, Derek was everywhere. Sunday dinners, fishing trips he'd invite himself along on, even a Tuesday afternoon when he showed up at my house, just passing through, with takeout from a place I'd never heard of. He was charming, attentive. He remembered details, my favorite jazz album, the year I opened the restaurant, the name of my first head chef, the kind of man who makes you feel important while quietly cataloging everything you say. Lauren seemed happy. That was enough for me, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Then the changes started. First, Lauren quit her job. "Derek thinks freelancing will give me more freedom," she told me over the phone, her voice carrying that careful brightness people use when they're repeating someone else's words. I asked if she was sure. She said Derek had done the math. 2 months later, she moved to Raleigh, 170 miles away. Derek had found an apartment on Glenwood Avenue. 3rd floor, $1,850 a month. "It's closer to his office," Lauren explained. I asked whose name was on the lease. She paused. "Mine. But Derek handles the finances. He's better with that stuff." The daily phone calls became weekly, then bi-weekly, then monthly, and shorter each time. When I'd ask about her work, she'd say, "Fine." When I'd ask about Derek, she'd say, "Great." When I'd suggest driving up for lunch, she'd say, "Let me check with Derek first. Let me check with Derek." I heard that phrase so many times it started sounding like a lock clicking shut. By the fall, I was calling into silence. Voicemail. Tex answered hours later with a thumbs-up emoji, which wasn't Lauren at all. My daughter used full sentences. She used exclamation points. She drew little smiley faces with crooked grins. A thumbs-up emoji was Derek's handwriting on her phone. Thanksgiving came. I called Lauren that morning early, hoping to catch her before Derek woke up. The phone rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, smooth, unhurried, the way you'd answer a call from a number you're thinking about blocking. "Harold, hey, Lauren's busy right now. She's helping with the turkey. I'll let her know you called. If she wants to, she'll call you back." "If she wants to," I said. "Tell my daughter I love her." He said, "Sure thing, buddy," and hung up. Lauren didn't call back that day, or the next, or the next. 12 days passed before my phone lit up with her name, and when I answered, all she said was, "Hi, Dad. Sorry. Things have been crazy." Her voice was flat, thin, like someone reading a script through a window. I wanted to drive to Raleigh that night. I wanted to bang on that apartment door and look Derek Collins in his perfect teeth and ask him what exactly he thought he was doing with my daughter. But I didn't. Because the thing about running a restaurant for 28 years is you learn when a situation needs a scene and when it needs patience. And something in Lauren's voice told me that a scene would make things worse. So I waited. 3 weeks before Christmas, I got a card in the mail. Not from Lauren. The handwriting was too neat, too deliberate. From Derek. Inside, a printed invitation to Christmas dinner at their apartment. And at the bottom, in pen, a note. "Come on over, Harold. I think it's time we talked, man to man." I read that line 3 times. Then I set the card on my kitchen counter, poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, not the Blantons he'd brought, I'd poured that down the drain months ago, and stared at it until the ice melted, man to man. As if he'd earned the right to say that to me. I decided to go, not because of the invitation, because somewhere behind those words, behind that neat handwriting and that smug little signature, my daughter was waiting for me to show up. The drive from Charlotte to Raleigh takes about 2 hours and 45 minutes if you keep to the speed limit. I left early on Christmas morning, the highways nearly empty, fog sitting low over the fields along I-85. I had a thermos of coffee and Coltrane on the speakers. A Love Supreme, the kind of album that makes you think clearly whether you want to or not. I kept replaying things in my head. There was this one evening, maybe 8 months after Lauren and Derek started dating. She drove down to Charlotte for the weekend, alone, which was already becoming rare. We sat on the back porch, and she was sketching in her notebook the way she used to. The neighbor's cat, the oak tree, my coffee mug. I asked how things were really going, and she said something I almost missed. "He gets upset when I don't answer my phone on the first ring." She didn't say more, just went back to drawing, the pencil pressing harder into the paper. I should have asked the next question, but she changed the subject, and the moment slipped past like a fish you see too late to cast for. That memory sat in my chest the whole drive. I pulled into their parking lot around 10. Derek opened the door before I knocked. Charcoal suit, no tie, top button undone. Behind him the apartment was spotless. White walls, modern furniture, no clutter, no color, and no sign that Lauren lived there at all. I remembered Lauren's old apartment in Charlotte. Every wall covered, her paintings, sketches, photographs from Savannah, a Basquiat print from a thrift store. That place looked like the inside of her mind. This one looked like a hotel lobby. A nice hotel, but nobody's home. "Harold, come in." Derek clapped my shoulder and steered me inside. His hand stayed a beat too long, guiding, not welcoming. "Gail, you remember Harold?" Gail Collins, Derek's mother, 62, was in an armchair by the window, white wine in hand despite it being barely past 10. She looked at me the way you look at a delivery driver who rang the bell too loud. "Harold," she said, not a greeting, a label. 2 of Derek's colleagues from Pinnacle Realty sat at the table already, Scott and Jess, both with the glossy friendliness of people who sell things for a living. Then Lauren came out of the kitchen. She'd lost at least 15 pounds. Her cheekbones were sharp, dark circles under her eyes. She was wearing a sweater I recognized from 3 years ago, pilled at the elbows, faded at the collar, while Derek stood there in an $800 suit. She hugged me, and I felt her ribs through the wool, and her hands trembled against my back. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, her fingers pressed into my arms. Not a hug, a grip. "Hey, sweetheart, Merry Christmas." Derek put me at the far end of the table, as far from Lauren as the room allowed. He sat next to her, arm draped over her chair. The meal was catered, I could tell immediately. The turkey was brined the way a professional kitchen does it, but Derek talked about it as though he'd cooked everything himself. Twice during dinner, Lauren started to speak. Both times, Derek cut her off. The first time, "Babe, let me finish this story first." The second, "Honey, the adults are talking." He said it with a smile, the kind that has teeth but no warmth. Gail laughed both times. Then came the toast. Derek stood, straightened his jacket, raised his glass, and looked around the table like a man surveying property he'd just purchased. "To our family," he said, and to the fact that I finally pulled Lauren away from her controlling father who never let her live. He looked at me. "No offense, Harold, but somebody had to cut the cord." Gail clapped. The colleagues laughed, short, uncomfortable. Lauren stared at her plate, fork in hand, not eating, perfectly still, like someone who'd learned that stillness was safer than movement. I picked up my water glass. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said, and I drank. Derek's grin widened. He thought the old man was finished. Minutes later, he left to refill the wine. Gail followed, complaining the Chardonnay was too warm. The colleagues checked their phones. For maybe 30 seconds, Lauren and I were alone. She reached across and slid something under the pie dish. Fast. Practiced. Like she'd been waiting for exactly this window. I took a piece of pie, lifted the dish slightly, palmed the folded napkin underneath, slid it into my shirt pocket without looking, took a bite of pie that tasted like nothing. I didn't read it at the table. I waited until I was in my truck, parked 2 blocks away, engine running, heater on. I unfolded the napkin. 3 words. Lauren's handwriting, small, shaky, pressed hard into the paper like she was afraid the letters would disappear. "Dad, save me." I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because the dashboard clock changed from 2:47 to 2:58 while I stared at those 3 words. Fog pressed against the windshield like the world had gone quiet to let me think. Then I folded the napkin, put it back in my pocket, and drove south toward Charlotte. Derek Collins had made the biggest mistake of his charming, well-dressed, perfectly rehearsed life. He'd forgotten what my daughter knew, and he didn't. Her old man doesn't make scenes. He makes plans. I didn't sleep that night. Not a minute. I sat at my kitchen table on Oakdale Drive with the napkin unfolded next to a cup of coffee that went cold twice before I stopped pretending I was going to drink it. 3 words. 3 words in my daughter's handwriting. The same handwriting that used to leave me little notes on the hostess stand at the Southern Lantern when she was 14. "Dad, table 6 says the gumbo is the best they've ever had." That was Lauren's handwriting when it was happy. Big, loopy, leaning forward like it was in a hurry to tell you something good. The handwriting on this napkin was different. Small, pressed down, the letters barely lifting off the paper, as if the pen itself was afraid of being heard. I didn't cry. I didn't punch a wall. I sat there and I thought about what I knew, what I suspected, and what I needed to find out. What I knew, my daughter was afraid. Not annoyed, not unhappy in the way people get during a rough patch. Afraid. The kind of afraid where you hide a note under a pie dish because you can't say the words out loud in your own apartment. What I suspected? Derek Collins was not who he presented himself to be. The charm, the confidence, the way he controlled every room he walked into. I'd seen that before. Not in my personal life, but in business. Over the years running the Southern Lantern, I'd met a few men like Derek. Suppliers who smiled while padding invoices. Managers who made everyone love them while skimming the register. The common thread was always the same. They were brilliant at making you feel like the problem was yours, not theirs. What I needed to find out? Everything. The next morning, I pulled an old leather notebook from my desk drawer, the same one I'd used for years to track problems at the restaurant, vendor issues, staffing conflicts, health code violations. Everything went in that notebook, organized by date, by category, by severity. I opened to a fresh page and wrote 3 columns. Facts, suspicions, questions. Under facts. Lauren isolated from all contacts. Lauren quit stable job. Lauren moved to Raleigh. Derek controls conversations. Derek controls seating. Lauren lost significant weight. Lauren's hands trembled. Lauren sent distress note. Under suspicions. Derek controls Lauren's phone. Derek controls finances. Derek has done this before. Under questions. What is Derek Collins's financial situation? Does Lauren have access to her own money? Has Derek had previous relationships that ended similarly? What are my legal options in North Carolina? I spent the next 4 days making quiet phone calls. I contacted the NC Bar Association's referral service and asked for investigators who specialized in financial matters and family situations. They gave me 3 names. I chose the one whose website said the least and whose credentials said the most. A firm called Gray Investigations. run by a former police officer named Nathan Gray. 5 days after Christmas, I sat across from Nathan in his office on the east side of Charlotte. He was 48, built like someone who'd spent the first half of his career chasing people, and the second half outsmarting them. He listened without interrupting, which in my experience is either the sign of a very patient man or a very dangerous one. Nathan Gray was both. I laid out what I knew. He asked 3 questions, all of them sharp. Does your daughter have her own bank accounts? Has she signed any documents recently that she mentioned? Does the fiancé have a real estate license in North Carolina? I answered what I could. Then I wrote him a check for $2,100, half of his $4,200 fee, and gave him Derek Collins's full name, address, and employer. I need to know who this man really is, I said, not who he says he is, who he really is. Nathan nodded. Give me 2 weeks. Now came the harder part, the performance. I called Lauren the next afternoon. Derek answered, of course. I kept my voice soft, tired, the voice of a man who'd been broken. Derek, I said, I've been thinking a lot since Christmas, and I owe you an apology. Silence on the other end. I could almost hear him recalculating. I was too controlling with Lauren, I continued. You were right. I held on too tight. I'd like to come up for coffee sometime, just to talk. No arguments. I just want to see my daughter. Derek's voice came back smooth and warm, the voice of a man who just won a negotiation without lifting a finger. Harold, that means a lot. Really. I think Lauren would love that. Let me set something up. 3 days later, I drove back to Raleigh. Derek met me at the door. Same firm handshake, same calculated smile. Lauren was on the couch with a mug of tea, and when she saw me, something flickered across her face. Hope, maybe, or fear that I'd say the wrong thing. I played my role. I asked Derek about his latest property deals. I complimented the apartment. I told Lauren her tea smelled wonderful. And when she went to the kitchen to refill the cups, I stood to put on my jacket and slipped a small prepaid phone into the inside pocket of her coat, hanging by the door. No note. She'd figure it out. At the door, I shook Derek's hand and thanked him for the coffee. See, Lauren, Derek said, his arm around her shoulders, looking at me the way a man looks at a dog that's finally learned to sit. Your dad gets it now. He understands who's in charge. I heard every word through the closing door. My jaw tightened so hard I tasted copper, but I smiled all the way to the truck, because Derek Collins had just confirmed everything I needed to know. He thought he'd won, and that was exactly where I needed him. About a week passed before the prepaid phone rang for the first time. I was on my back porch, tying a new fly for a weekend trip to the Catawba, a woolly bugger, olive and black, the kind that works when the water's cold and the trout are sitting deep. My regular phone was on the table. The prepaid sat in my shirt pocket, where it had been every waking hour since I'd slipped it into Lauren's coat. It buzzed once, then again I picked up. Dad? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I could hear a faucet running in the background. She'd turned the water on to cover the sound. I'm here, sweetheart. He checks my phone every night. He goes through my texts, my call history, my emails. He deleted all my contacts 3 months ago, said I didn't need them. If I want to call someone, I have to ask him first, and he listens to the whole conversation. She paused. The faucet kept running. I found the phone in my coat. I keep it inside my pillowcase when he's home. Lauren, I need you to do something. Can you get to your bank statements? Anything with your name on it. Credit cards, loan documents, anything. He handles all of that. He said it was easier. He set up a joint account, but I don't have the login. He changed it. What about your savings? The account you had before? The one from your design work? He moved it. He said he was consolidating. I had $43,000 in there, Dad. He said it's in our joint account now, but when I asked to see the balance, he got upset and said I was being paranoid. Okay, don't push him on it. Don't change anything. Just keep this phone hidden and call me when it's safe. Dad, I can't just leave. He tells me I owe him money. He says the apartment, the car, the furniture. He paid for all of it, and if I walk out, he'll take me to court. I don't even know if that's true. It's not, I said, but we'll deal with that. Just trust me. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I trust you. The line went dead. The faucet sound disappeared. I sat on that porch for a long time, the half-tide fly forgotten in my lap, the winter sun going flat against the yard. $43,000. That was Lauren's savings. Every freelance check, every contract, every late night designing logos and branding packages for small businesses. Gone. Moved into an account she couldn't access, controlled by a man who'd convinced her she owed him for the privilege of being trapped. 2 days later, Nathan Gray called with his preliminary findings. We met at his office. He had a manila folder on his desk, thin but heavy in a way that had nothing to do with paperweight. He opened it and slid the first document toward me. 2 credit cards opened in Lauren Patterson's name in the last 14 months, he said. Total outstanding balance, $127,000. I stared at the number. Lauren doesn't have $127,000 in credit card debt. She doesn't know she has it. The cards were opened using her Social Security number. One was used to purchase a BMW X5, $62,000, registered to Derek Collins. The second has $65,000 in charges: restaurants, hotels, clothing, a $4,800 watch, business expenses for his real estate work. None of it connected to your daughter. He slid another document across. Bank statements showing Lauren's savings, $43,000, transferred in a single transaction to a joint account where only Derek had access. There's more, Nathan said. Derek Collins was previously engaged, 3 years ago in Wilmington, a woman named Christine. The engagement ended after her father discovered similar financial irregularities. They settled privately, no charges filed. I leaned back in my chair. So this is a pattern, I said. This is a business model, Nathan corrected. He finds women with good credit and stable income. He isolates them, takes control of their finances, runs up debt in their names, and moves on. Christine was the practice run. Your daughter is the upgrade. I looked at the documents. BMW receipts, hotel charges, a $4,800 watch, all paid for with my daughter's name while she sat in a faded sweater in an apartment she paid $1,850 a month to rent. What do you need from me? I asked. Time, Nathan said. Another week, maybe 10 days. I want to pull his full financial history, check for other aliases, and document his current activities. There's something else? He's been meeting regularly with a woman named Tara Reed, 29, listed as a client at Pinnacle Realty, but these meetings don't look like property viewings. Lunches, dinners, evening visits to apartments that aren't on the market. How many meetings? 14 in the last 3 weeks. I have photographs. 14 meetings in 3 weeks. While Lauren sat alone in that apartment, checking her pillowcase to make sure her secret phone was still hidden. I drove home with the windows down despite the cold. The air helped me think. What I had now was more than suspicion. It was evidence. And evidence, in the right hands, is the difference between an angry old man shouting at a wall and a case that a courtroom takes seriously. I wasn't ready to move yet, but the net was taking shape. And Derek Collins, sitting in his $62,000 BMW, wearing his $4,800 watch, smiling at a woman who wasn't my daughter, had no idea it was already closing around him. That evening, the prepaid phone buzzed again. Dad, he's asleep. I only have a minute. I'm listening, her voice cracked. He checks my phone every day, Dad. He's deleted every contact except his own. I don't know what to do, but I can't just walk out. He says I owe him. He says if I leave, he'll make sure I'm buried in debt for years. I closed my eyes, took a breath. Lauren, I said quietly, you don't owe that man a single penny, and I promise you, when this is over, he'll be the one counting what he's lost. About 3 weeks after I first sat in Nathan Gray's office, I found myself in a very different chair. Leather, high-backed, in a conference room on North Tryon Street in Charlotte. The nameplate on the door read, Spencer and Lockhart, attorneys at law. The woman across the table was Vivian Spencer, 52, dark hair pulled back tight, reading glasses at the end of her nose, and a handshake that could crack a walnut. She specialized in financial abuse within family relationships, protective orders, and the annulment of fraudulent contracts. Nathan had recommended her. If you want someone who won't flinch, he'd said, Vivian Spencer is the one. She didn't flinch. I'd brought everything: Nathan's full report, the credit card statements, the bank transfers, the photographs of Derek with Tara Reid, and notes from my conversations with Lauren on the prepaid phone. Vivian spread it across the conference table like a surgeon laying out instruments, and spent 40 minutes reading without a word. When she finally looked up, she set her glasses down with the kind of deliberate care that told me she was about to say something that mattered. Mr. Patterson, what your daughter's fiancé has done is not a gray area. Opening credit accounts in someone's name without their informed consent is identity theft. Using those accounts for personal purchases is financial fraud. Both are felonies under North Carolina law. So we go to the police, I said. Not yet. She held up one finger. If we go to law enforcement today, Derek Collins will know within 24 hours. And a man like this, organized, methodical, will destroy every piece of evidence he can reach. By the time an investigation gets rolling, half the paper trail will be gone. Then what do we do? Vivian leaned forward. 3 things, in order. First, we build a case so airtight that no denial can crack it. Second, we prepare legal instruments to protect Lauren the moment she leaves. Credit freezes, fraud alerts, a protective framework for her financial identity. Third, we strike fast enough that Derek can't react. She paused. We need Lauren physically safe and out of that apartment before any legal action is filed. Can you guarantee that? I can, I said. Good. Then we wait until Nathan has everything. I want bank records, credit applications, the vehicle registration for that BMW, and, if possible, documentation of his relationship with this Tara Reid. The more threads we pull, the harder it is for him to claim any of it was a misunderstanding. I nodded. How much is this going to cost? My retainer is $7,500. If this goes to civil court, and I believe it will, you're looking at $15,000 to $25,000 in total legal fees, depending on how hard he fights. I wrote the check. It didn't feel like spending money. It felt like loading a weapon. Over the next 2 weeks, I played my part. I called Derek twice, once to ask his advice about a property listing I'd seen in Charlotte. Derek, you're the expert. What do you think of this neighborhood? And once to thank him for being such a good influence on Lauren. Both times his voice dripped with the same oily satisfaction. He loved the idea of the broken old father asking for guidance. I could practically hear him puffing up through the phone. Meanwhile, Nathan was busy. His surveillance reports arrived by secure email every 3 days. Derek and Tara Reid. Dinner at a steak place on Glenwood South, a Tuesday. A showing at a condo that had been off the market for 2 months, a Thursday. Drinks at a rooftop bar downtown the following Saturday. Nathan had photographs of all of it, 47 images over 3 weeks, time-stamped and geotagged. Tara was 29, dark-haired, and listed as a client in Derek's Pinnacle Realty records. But clients don't hold your hand across a restaurant table. Clients don't lean into you in a parking garage at 11 o'clock at night. I kept all of it in a folder in my desk drawer, right next to the napkin. Then came the meeting that changed the shape of everything. I was back in Vivian's office, reviewing the final batch of Nathan's findings, when she set down her pen and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, something between professional satisfaction and the look of a chess player who's just spotted a move 3 turns ahead. Mr. Patterson, there's one more angle I want to discuss. Are you familiar with the concept of alienation of affections? I wasn't. North Carolina is one of only a handful of states that still recognizes this cause of action. In simple terms, it allows a person to file a civil lawsuit against someone who intentionally destroyed a close familial relationship. In this case, your relationship with your daughter, for personal benefit. If we can demonstrate that Derek Collins deliberately isolated Lauren from you, manipulated her into cutting contact, and did so in order to gain financial control over her, you have grounds for a civil suit. What kind of numbers are we talking about? Juries in North Carolina have awarded anywhere from $30,000 to over $8 million in alienation of affections cases. The amount depends on the severity of the interference and the quality of the evidence. She tapped Nathan's folder. And Mr. Patterson, we have very good evidence. I sat there for a moment. For the first time in over a month, since Christmas dinner, since the napkin, since the sleepless night at my kitchen table, I smiled. Not because of the money, because Derek Collins had spent 2 years building a cage around my daughter, and he'd never once considered that someone might build one around him. I need to take you back to that Christmas dinner. I know I've told you pieces of it already. The toast, the napkin, the drive home. But I haven't told you everything. I held some of it back because I wasn't ready. Now I am. I want you to understand exactly what that room felt like. I arrived at Lauren's apartment a little after 10 that morning. Derek opened the door in his charcoal suit, and the first thing he did was steer me toward the far end of the living room. Not toward Lauren, not toward the kitchen, toward the chair farthest from everything, angled away from the dining table, behind a side table stacked with real estate magazines. He parked me there the way you'd leave a car you didn't plan on driving again. Gail, Derek's mother, was already seated by the window with her Chardonnay. She watched me sit down, then said, loud enough for Derek to hear, "Derek, you've done well keeping this one at arm's length." Derek laughed from the other room. "It's a process, Mom." A process. That's what I was to them. Lauren came out carrying a tray of appetizers, prosciutto skewers, crackers fanned around a cheese board, the kind of careful arrangement she used to do at the Southern Lantern when she was 16, helping me set up for private parties. She still had the touch, but her hands weren't steady. The tray trembled as she set it down, and she avoided my eyes the way someone does when making contact might break something they're barely holding together. "Hi, Daddy," she said. Quiet. Practiced. I wanted to stand up and take her out of that apartment right then, but I knew, the way you know the stove is hot without touching it, that if I made a scene, Derek would use it against her. He'd say, "See? Your father can't control himself. This is why I had to separate you." So I sat in my assigned chair, and I smiled, and I said, "Everything looks wonderful, sweetheart." Derek's 2 colleagues from Pinnacle Realty, Scott and Jess, arrived shortly after. He introduced them by their sales rankings, not their last names. They shook my hand with trained enthusiasm and sat where Derek pointed. Derek took the head of the table, Gail to his left, Lauren to his right. I was at the opposite end, separated from my daughter by 2 colleagues, and a centerpiece that blocked my view of her face. Lauren tried to speak twice during the meal. The first time, she started telling a story about a freelance project, a branding package she'd designed for a bakery in Raleigh. She was 2 sentences in when Derek put his hand on her arm. "Babe, hold that thought. I was just about to tell everyone about the Whitaker listing." She stopped, picked up her fork, said nothing. The second time, she mentioned something funny that had happened at the grocery store. A small human moment, the kind Lauren used to be full of. Derek didn't even look at her. "Honey, let the grown-ups finish," Gail snorted into her wine. Scott looked at his plate. Jess suddenly found her napkin very interesting, and Lauren sat there with that forced half-smile, the one that doesn't reach the eyes, the one I'd seen on servers at my restaurant, who were having the worst night of their lives, but couldn't afford to let it show, because the tips were the only thing keeping their lights on. Then Derek stood up. He straightened his suit jacket, the $800 one, the one he bought with credit cards that had my daughter's name on them, though I didn't know that yet. And he raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, "to this family, and to the fact that I finally got Lauren away from her controlling father." He looked directly at me, his eyes bright, his smile wide and polished. "She's free now, because of me." Gail clapped. Actually clapped. Palms together, 3 sharp beats, like she was applauding a tennis serve. Scott and Jess produced short, uncomfortable laughs. Lauren stared at her plate. Her fork was in her hand, but she wasn't eating. She wasn't moving at all. I picked up my glass of water. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said, and I drank, because if I'd opened my mouth to say anything else, what came out would not have been words. A few minutes later, Derek left the table to refill the wine. Gail followed, complaining about the bottle being too warm. The colleagues were on their phones, and for 30 seconds, maybe less, it was just me and Lauren. She moved fast. Her hand slid across the table, and something small and white disappeared under the pie dish in front of me. Her eyes met mine for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away. I palmed the napkin, slipped it into my shirt pocket, took a bite of pie. I didn't read it until I was in my truck, 2 blocks away. You already know what it said, but what I haven't told you is what I saw when I looked at Lauren in that 1 second our eyes met. It wasn't just fear. I'd seen fear before, on people's faces when a kitchen fire broke out, when a bad review hit the paper, when a business was going under. Fear has energy. Fear moves. What I saw in Lauren's eyes was something else. It was the look of someone who has stopped believing that doors open. The look of someone who has been told so many times that the cage is their own fault that they've started to believe it. I'd seen it once before, years ago when a waitress at the Southern Lantern came to her shift with a bruise under her eye, covered with foundation, and told me she'd walked into a cabinet door. That same stillness, that same absence of hope. I smiled at Derek when he came back with the wine. I thanked him for a lovely meal. I shook his hand at the door and told him I looked forward to next time. And on the drive home, with that napkin burning in my pocket, I made myself a promise. The man who punches with his fist is a fool. The man who strikes with his mind wins. And I was done being patient. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Vivian Spencer doesn't take meetings on Mondays. She spends Mondays in court. And I'd been waiting since the weekend for this one, sitting on my porch, pretending to tie flies, watching the phone like it owed me money. The folder on Vivian's conference table was 2 inches thick. I'd watched it grow over the past several weeks, page by page, document by document, from a thin collection of suspicions into something that had weight. Real weight. Vivian opened it and laid the contents out in sections, the way a dealer lays out cards. Section 1. Credit card statements. 2 accounts opened in Lauren Patterson's name. Total balance $127,000. Application signatures that didn't match Lauren's handwriting. A BMW X5 purchase for $62,000 charged to the first card. Vehicle registered to Derek Collins. The second card loaded with restaurant tabs, hotel rooms, a $4,800 watch, and dozens of line items labeled business development that had nothing to do with Lauren. Section 2. Bank records. Lauren's personal savings, $43,000, built over 4 years of freelance work, transferred in a single transaction to a joint account at a bank in Raleigh, an account where Derek Collins was the sole signatory with online access. Section 3. Nathan Gray's surveillance photographs. 47 images of Derek Collins with Tara Reid over a 3-week period, dinners, lunches, an evening at an apartment that had been off the market for 2 months, a parking garage, a hand on a lower back, none of it ambiguous. Section 4. A signed statement from Christine, Derek's previous fiancé in Wilmington, describing an identical pattern. Credit cards opened in her name, savings redirected, isolation from family. The engagement ended only after her father hired an attorney, and the case was settled privately, with no criminal charges. Section 5. Transcripts of Lauren's calls from the prepaid phone, in which she described Derek checking her phone daily, deleting her contacts, controlling her access to money, and telling her she owed him for the apartment, the furniture, the car. Vivian closed the folder and looked at me. "We're ready," she said. I nodded. What happens first? Lauren files fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. She can do this by phone, and it takes effect immediately. Every credit account opened without her consent gets flagged and frozen. The cards Derek has been using will stop working within hours. And then we get Lauren out of that apartment, before he finds out, before he has time to retaliate. I'd already planned this part. Lauren and I had been talking on the prepaid phone every 2 or 3 days. She knew the outline, not the details, but enough. She knew that when I said the word, she needed to have 1 bag packed and be ready to walk out the door. That afternoon, I called her. "Tonight," I said, "pack 1 bag, only what matters, documents, your laptop, clothes for a few days, leave everything else." "He's going to a dinner at 7, she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than I'd heard it in months. "He always leaves by 6:30. I'll be in the parking lot at 6:40. At 4 o'clock, Lauren called the fraud hotlines. 3 calls, each under 10 minutes. She gave her social security number, confirmed her identity, and placed a fraud alert on her credit file. Every card that Derek Collins had opened using her information was flagged for suspicious activity. The accounts didn't just freeze. They triggered an automatic review by each bank's fraud department. At 6:30, Derek walked out of the apartment in a blue blazer, heading to dinner, with Tara Reid, though Lauren didn't know that part yet. At 6:40, I pulled my truck into the parking lot on Glenwood Avenue. Lauren was standing by the side entrance with a single duffel bag, wearing the same faded sweater from Christmas dinner. She got in, closed the door, and didn't look back at the building. We didn't talk much on the drive to Charlotte. She held the duffel bag on her lap and stared out the window at the highway. About an hour in, she said, "He's going to be so angry." "Yes," I said, "he is." "What if he comes to Charlotte? He can come wherever he likes, but he's going to find that the ground has shifted under his feet." We were 20 minutes from home when my phone rang. Derek's number. I put it on speaker. His voice was different. Gone was the smooth, rehearsed confidence. What came through the speaker was raw, tight, high, furious. "What did you do, old man? My card just got declined. At a restaurant. In front of—" "What did you do?" I glanced at Lauren. She was watching the phone the way you watch a snake behind glass, afraid but knowing it can't reach you. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice level, "I ran a restaurant for 28 years. You know what I did when someone stole from the register? I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just called the auditor. You think this is funny? You think you can play games with me? I will bury you. I will bury both of you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," I said, "I think I have a very clear idea." I hung up. Lauren was looking at me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Something in her expression had changed, something small and quiet, like a window opening in a room that had been sealed shut for too long. "Dad," she said, "thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "We're just getting started." Derek Collins did not take his defeat quietly. I didn't expect him to. A man like that, a man who's built his entire life around control, doesn't lose a piece of it without trying to burn down the board. The counterattack started 2 days after Lauren left the apartment. First came the phone calls, not to me, to everyone else. Derek called Lauren's old colleagues from her design agency. He called 2 of my former suppliers from the restaurant. He called a neighbor on Oakdale Drive. The story was always the same. Harold Patterson was a controlling, manipulative father who had kidnapped his own adult daughter. Lauren was mentally unstable. Derek was the victim, the loving fiancé trying to save her from a toxic family situation. Some people saw through it. My neighbor Bill told Derek to stop calling or he'd report him for harassment, but others weren't so sure. One of Lauren's old colleagues texted her asking if she was okay and whether she needed help getting away from your dad. I watched Lauren read it at the kitchen table, and I saw the doubt flicker across her face, the old programming kicking in, Derek's voice whispering that maybe she was the problem. "He's lying," I said. "I know," she said, but her hands were shaking again. Then came the police. 4 days after Lauren moved in with me, 2 officers from the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department knocked on my front door. They were polite, professional, and clearly uncomfortable. Derek had filed a report in Raleigh claiming that Lauren had stolen shared property when she left, specifically a laptop computer valued at $1,400. I invited them in, offered coffee. Then I called Vivian Spencer, who answered on the second ring, and asked me to hand the phone to the senior officer. I don't know exactly what Vivian said, but I heard phrases like original purchase receipt dated 2023, sole purchaser Lauren Patterson, and I have the documentation in my office and can fax it within the hour. The officers thanked me, declined the coffee, and left. I watched their cruiser pull away from the curb and felt a small, sharp satisfaction, the kind you get when a trap you built for rats catches exactly what it was meant to catch. But Derek wasn't finished. A week after the police visit, Vivian called me to her office. She had a document on her desk, a civil complaint filed in Wake County Superior Court. Derek Collins, through his attorney, was suing Lauren Patterson for $43,000 in shared living expenses and financial contributions to the relationship. He's claiming Lauren owes him $43,000, I said. He's claiming that the money he transferred from her savings account was a mutual decision and that the shared living arrangements created an implied financial obligation. Vivian took off her glasses. It's nonsense, of course. He stole her money, and now he's suing her for it. But the point isn't to win. The point is to frighten her, to drag her into court, to make this expensive and exhausting, to pressure her into settling or dropping her fraud claims. What do we do? Vivian smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that a chess player gives when the opponent makes a move that looks aggressive, but actually opens up the board. We file a counterclaim, identity theft, financial fraud, unauthorized use of personal information. We're not asking for $43,000, Mr. Patterson. We're asking for $170,000, the full amount of the fraudulent debt, plus compensatory damages, plus statutory penalties under North Carolina's identity theft statutes. She slid a document across the table. I've already drafted it. I just need Lauren's signature. Lauren signed it that afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table, with steady hands and dry eyes. Something in her had hardened over the past week, not in a bad way, but in the way that a cracked bone hardens once it starts to heal. She wasn't shaking anymore. She was angry, and anger, properly directed, is the most useful fuel there is. Derek's lawsuit arrived on a Monday. Our counterclaim was filed on Wednesday. His attorney called Vivian on Thursday to discuss options. Vivian told him to read the counterclaim carefully and call back when he understood what his client was actually facing. Then, on a Friday evening, my phone rang. Nathan Gray. Mr. Patterson, I found something new. His voice was the same flat, professional tone it always was, but there was something underneath it, a current of genuine surprise, which I'd never heard from him before. Go ahead. Derek Collins is not his real name. He changed it legally 5 years ago. His birth name is Derek Morris, and under that name, he has 2 open civil suits in South Carolina, both for fraud. One involves a former business partner. The other involves a woman in Greenville who claims he opened credit accounts in her name. I sat down, not because I was shocked. Very little about Derek could shock me at this point, but because the scope of what he'd built was suddenly clear. This wasn't a man who'd made a few bad choices. This was someone who'd turned deception into a career, changed his name the way others change shirts, and left a trail of damaged people across state lines. Nathan, I said, can you get me everything under the Morris name? Court filings, addresses, any other aliases? Already working on it. I should have a full report by early next week. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my kitchen. Through the window, I could see Lauren on the back porch, sketching something in a notebook, the first time she'd drawn anything since she'd arrived. The pencil moved slowly, carefully, the way it does when you're relearning something you used to do without thinking. Derek Morris, not Collins. Morris. A man with 2 names, 2 open lawsuits, a trail of stolen identities, and the absolute certainty that no one would ever catch him. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Nathan's report on Derek Morris arrived 4 days later. 2 civil fraud suits in South Carolina, one from a former business partner in Charleston, the other from a woman in Greenville whose story read like a carbon copy of Lauren's, credit cards in her name, savings drained, isolation from family. The Charleston case had resulted in a default judgment of $38,000 that Derek had never paid. I brought the report to Vivian. She read it twice, then set it down. Your daughter's fiancé is operating under a name change with outstanding fraud judgments in another state. He opened $127,000 in credit under stolen identity. He has a documented pattern of financial predation, and he's licensed as a real estate agent, a profession that requires background checks and ethical standards. She paused. This man's career is built on sand, and we have every shovel we need. The plan had 2 parts. First, a formal letter on firm letterhead to Randall Hoffman, the managing broker at Pinnacle Realty. Copies of the fraud documentation, the name change records, and the South Carolina judgments. Second, a formal complaint to the NC Real Estate Commission. Derek Morris, operating as Collins, had maintained an undisclosed personal relationship with a client, Tara Reed. Ethical violation, license suspension. I've timed this deliberately, Vivian said. Pinnacle Realty's annual client event is Saturday at the Capitol Grill in Raleigh. 40 guests. Derek will be there in his best suit, and Hoffman will have had 48 hours to verify every word in my letter. You planned this around his party, I said. I planned this around the moment when he'd have the most to lose in front of the most people who matter to him. I drove back to Charlotte and waited. The hardest part of any plan is the space between setting the trap and hearing it snap shut. Saturday evening came. I drove to Raleigh, coffee in the thermos, no music this time. I parked my truck in the far corner of the Capitol Grill's lot at 6:30, cut the engine, and waited. Through the restaurant's tall windows, I could see the event in full swing. About 40 people, men in suits, women in cocktail attire, servers moving between tables with trays of appetizers, and there was Derek, center of the room, navy suit, white shirt, that smile, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, working the crowd like it was his kingdom. I watched Randall Hoffman arrive. 55, silver hair, the kind of man whose handshake means a contract and whose silence means a termination. He walked in, and Derek moved toward him immediately, hand extended, smile locked in place. Hoffman shook his hand, said something brief, then turned and spoke to another colleague. For about an hour, nothing visible happened. Derek worked the room. Hoffman stayed near the bar, talking to clients, checking his phone. Then, at what I estimated was about 8 o'clock, Hoffman set down his drink, straightened his tie, and walked toward Derek. He leaned in close, said 2 words. I couldn't hear them through the glass, but I could read Derek's face. The smile didn't just disappear. It collapsed, like a building losing its foundation. 1 second it was there. The next it was gone, replaced by something blank and tight, and very, very still. They walked together toward the hallway near the restrooms, out of sight of the guests, out of sight of me. 3 minutes passed, 4. Then Derek came back into the main room. His face was the color of old paper. Not white exactly, but drained, emptied, like someone had pulled a plug. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscles from the parking lot. He stood near the entrance of the dining room, and I watched him scan the crowd. Some of the guests were looking at their phones. A few were whispering. One woman near the window put her hand over her mouth. Vivian's letter to the Raleigh Association of Realtors had arrived. Derek stood there for maybe 10 seconds, frozen, staring, his hands hanging at his sides like they'd forgotten what they were for. Then he turned and walked fast toward the front door. Not running, but close. The walk of a man who's realized the floor is on fire and doesn't want anyone to see him leave. He pushed through the doors and into the parking lot. The night air was cold, mid-February cold, the kind that bites through a suit jacket. He pulled out his phone, stared at it, put it back, looked around the lot like he was searching for something that wasn't there. Then he saw my truck. He walked toward me fast, his shoes clicking on the asphalt, his breath coming in short, visible bursts. I rolled down my window, took a sip of coffee from the thermos. "You," he said, his voice cracked on the word. "You did this. You destroyed my life, my career, everything." I looked at him. His tie was crooked. His hands were shaking. The same tremor I'd seen in Lauren's hands at Christmas dinner. Funny how that works. "No, Derek," I said. I took another sip. "Or should I say Derek Morris? I didn't destroy anything. I just showed people what was already there." His face went through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Rage, then confusion, then something that looked almost like fear. The fear of a man who's just realized that the person he dismissed as weak has been watching him the entire time. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," I said. "You just don't know it yet." I rolled up the window, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, Derek Morris stood alone under a streetlight in a parking lot full of cars that no longer belonged to his clients, wearing a suit that was probably still being charged to my daughter's name, staring at the taillights of an old Ford F-150, driven by a 64-year-old fisherman who just dismantled his entire world without raising his voice. He was screaming something. I couldn't hear it. I didn't need to. The weeks that followed moved fast. The first domino was the credit cards. Vivian filed Lauren's fraud affidavits with both issuing banks, accompanied by a forensic handwriting analysis. A certified graphologist confirmed that the signatures on the applications did not match Lauren's handwriting. Within 10 business days, both accounts, $127,000 total, were flagged as fraudulent. Lauren was removed as the responsible party. The debt transferred to Derek Morris. The second domino was the lawsuit. Derek's attorney, a man named Voss, had filed the $43,000 claim with considerable aggression. But when Vivian's $170,000 counterclaim landed on his desk, identity theft, financial fraud, unauthorized use of personal information, supported by 2 inches of documentation, the aggression vanished. A week later, Voss withdrew from the case entirely. Off the record, his paralegal told Vivian he'd discovered the name change and the South Carolina judgments, and wanted no part of it. Derek Morris was unrepresented, facing a $170,000 counterclaim and unable to find a new attorney. The third domino was the license. The NC Real Estate Commission opened a formal investigation. Operating under an undisclosed name, failure to disclose prior judgments, and an undisclosed personal relationship with a client. They issued an immediate interim suspension. Derek could not legally sell real estate in North Carolina. The fourth domino was Tara Reid. She learned about Lauren, about the fiancé at home, the credit cards, the stolen savings, the previous fiancé in Wilmington. She filed her own complaint with the commission. Then came the phone call from Gail Collins, Derek's mother. It was a Wednesday morning. I was on my back porch with coffee, watching the cardinal work through the feeder Lauren had hung from the porch railing 2 days earlier. The phone rang, and a voice I hadn't heard since Christmas came through like a rusty saw. "You've ruined him," Gail said. No greeting, no preamble. "My son had a career, a future, a woman who loved him. And you jealous, bitter old man, you destroyed it all because you couldn't stand that someone took your daughter away from you." I let her finish. Then I said, "Gail, your son destroyed himself. I just turned on the light in the room." She hung up. I drank my coffee. Vivian filed the alienation of affection suit the following week. The claim argued that Derek Morris had deliberately and systematically destroyed the relationship between Harold Patterson and his daughter, Lauren Patterson, for the purpose of financial exploitation. The evidence included the documented isolation, the financial fraud, the pattern of behavior established by the Christine case in Wilmington, and Lauren's own testimony. The suit was accepted for consideration by the Wake County Superior Court. As for Lauren, she was coming back, not all at once, not in some dramatic movie moment transformation, but in small, real ways that meant more than any courtroom victory. She started seeing a counselor who specialized in recovery from manipulative relationships, twice a week at an office in uptown Charlotte. She began doing freelance design work again, picking up small projects through a local agency that a friend of Vivian's had recommended. She cooked dinner one night, nothing fancy, just pasta and a salad, and when she set the plate in front of me, she said, "I used to make this for the staff at the Southern Lantern, remember?" I remembered. She hung 2 of her sketches on the wall of my guest room, then a watercolor, then a photograph from our fishing trip on the Catawba, 3 years ago, before Derek, before any of this. The room stopped looking like a guest room and started looking like Lauren's room, and that was enough. One evening, about 2 weeks after the party at the Capitol Grill, we were sitting on the porch. The sun was going down behind the oak tree in the yard, and Lauren had a sketchbook open on her knees, the leather-bound one I'd bought her for Christmas, the one she'd never opened at that dinner. She was drawing the cardinal on the feeder, quick, confident lines, the pencil moving the way it used to. "Dad," she said without looking up. "Yeah? Thank you." I took a sip of coffee. "For what?" She looked at me then. Her eyes were clear, steady. The tremor in her hands was gone. The dark circles were fading. She looked like the woman I remembered, not the one from Christmas dinner, but the one from before, the one who called me every day on her lunch break to talk about nothing. "For reading the note," she said. I nodded. I read the note, and I did what fathers do. I didn't let anyone steal my daughter. We sat there until the light was gone and the cardinal flew off and the coffee went cold. Lauren kept drawing. I kept watching. And somewhere in Raleigh, Derek Morris, No longer Collins, no longer a real estate agent, no longer a fiancé, no longer anything he'd pretended to be. Sat alone in an apartment he could no longer afford, facing $127,000 in debt, a $170,000 lawsuit, a suspended license, and the slow, irreversible collapse of every lie he'd ever built. He had screamed at me in that parking lot, and I had smiled. Because that's the thing about men like Derek. They spend their whole lives convincing everyone they're the smartest person in the room, and then they meet someone who doesn't need to prove it. Someone who just sits quietly, drinks his coffee, and waits for the truth to do what the truth always does. It catches up. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.